Your team finally got the green light to redesign that terrible old feature from back when the company first launched a couple years back. That old version had been limping along for years, everybody hated it, and after months of convincing, leadership finally gave the approval. So you open your design tool of choice, and what's the first thing you do? Well, you pull up the old design, just to reference it, just to see what's there. It makes sense, right? And now watch what happens over the next several weeks. The whole thing looks nicer, feels more modern, yet somehow it's the exact same product, just with a new coat of paint. You didn't redesign anything, you just reskinned it. You likely didn't make that choice on purpose. The moment that you opened the old file, it became the center of gravity. Every new idea drifted a little bit away from it, and then it stopped. Because the old design was quietly deciding what that feature was even allowed to be before you even started. And it's not just designs, it's the first number thrown out as an estimate, the first draft of the PRD, the first opinion in the room. Whatever's offered up first sets the framing, and then everyone else spends the rest of the meeting adjusting around that instead of asking if it was the right starting point to begin with. So if your team has ever set out to reinvent something and ended up rearranging it instead, stick around, because today we're talking about why whoever goes first usually wins and what you and your team can do about it. What's up, UX fam? How's your mom and them? Welcome to another episode of the Cognition Catalog, where every week or so, we'll dig into a new cognitive bias and explore how that bias can impact how our team works together and what we can do to ensure we don't get caught up in the pitfalls. Because working with people is hard, and the more insights we have into the human condition make it just a little bit easier. To learn more about the anchoring effect, you can find more resources at cognitioncatalog.com, and click the little bell down there so you get notified when a new episode drops, so you never have to worry about falling for any of these cognitive biases again. And shout out to this week's sponsor, Mobbin. If your team is tired of reinventing the wheel every time a new project kicks off, Mobbin gives you access to over 600,000 beautifully designed UI screens and user flows, and it's all searchable with AI. It's the kind of tool that makes the whole team faster. So visit mobbin.com/beyondux to get 20% off Mobbin Pro and see why more design teams are making it a company-wide staple in 2026. And as always, thanks so much to Chris, Siraquan, Stacy, Radu, Megan, Andrew, John, Mark, Kevin, Jason, Michelle, Marty, Tino, Adina, and Zoe for all their support. And for more information on how you can support the show and help more people find out about what we're doing, make sure to check out beyonduxdesign.com/support. And of course, if you think the show is worth sharing, then for the love of God, tell your mom and them. So here's a moment that plays out all the time on software teams. Somebody's running an estimation meeting. It's probably a new project, fresh set of tickets. Everybody's got their coffee cups all filled up. And one person, usually whoever's the most eager, sometimes just the most senior, says first, "Yeah, this is probably a 2-week thing." 2 weeks. Okay. Now, nobody actually knows if it's a 2-week thing yet. That work hasn't been scoped, but that number's out there in the wild now, and something just happened to everybody else's brain. The person who thought it might take a month doesn't say a month anymore. They say, well, maybe a little bit more than 2 weeks. The person who figured it was closer to 5 days now feels weirdly aggressive, giving such a small number, and everybody else just adjusts towards that initial 2-week estimate. It's a little bit in each direction, and then eventually the team lands on roughly 2 weeks. Not because 2 weeks was necessarily the right estimate, but because 2 weeks was the first. And you can watch the same thing happen with almost anything. The first person to share a design direction sets where that feature heads. The first draft of that strategy doc becomes the thing that everybody edits. The first stakeholder to name a budget sets the ceiling for a conversation about realistic possibilities that hadn't even started yet. Now, none of these people are trying to run the room. Well, maybe some of them are, but most people, they just happen to go first. But going first turns out to be kind of a superpower, because the human brain is weirdly loyal to whatever it saw at the start. Now, we tend to grab onto that initial reference point and then make tiny adjustments off of that, and we almost always stop adjusting too soon. Now, the crazy part is that to most of us, this doesn't feel like we're being influenced or manipulated by other people. It just feels like we're thinking independently. We genuinely believe that we reasoned our way to 2 weeks, but we didn't notice that somebody had handed us that number, and all we did was dress it up a little bit. So, what is the anchoring effect? Well, we tend to lean too heavily on the first piece of information that we encounter when making a decision or an estimate. The first number, the first idea, or reference point becomes an anchor, and everything that we think afterwards gets pulled towards it, even when the anchor is totally random, completely irrelevant, or just flat out wrong. Now, most explanations of anchoring start with a number. Now, the more interesting part is what happens after we see that number. Amos, Tversky, and Daniel Kahneman named this effect back in 1974, and what they described was a 2-step mental move that they called anchoring and adjustment. So you take a starting value, then you nudge it up or down until you reach an answer that feels right. It's simple enough, yeah? The problem is with step 2, where the nudging tends to stop too soon, and we tend to settle near the anchor, and then we just call it a day. They demonstrated this with a Wheel of Fortune type experiment that was secretly rigged to stop on one of two numbers, either 10 or 65. Now, participants watched the wheel spin. They believed it was completely random, and then the researchers asked them to estimate something completely unrelated to the wheel. They had participants estimate the share of African countries in the United Nations, completely and utterly distinct from the Wheel of Fortune style wheel that they just spun. Now, the participants who saw 65 on the spin, they guessed high, and the people who saw 10 on the spin, they guessed low. So a number with absolutely no connection to the question about how many African countries are in the UN, that spin still influenced their answer. Now stop and think about how strange that is. The participants thought that they had just watched a completely random spin and that number meant absolutely nothing, but it still anchored their guesses anyway. And that's the real lesson here, and it's why anchoring is so dangerous. You don't have to believe the first thing that you see has anything to do with anything else. You just need to see that number first. Now, later research dug into why our adjustment tends to fall short. Nick Epley and Tom Gilovich framed it as a resource trade-off. So adjusting away from an anchor, it takes mental effort, and that effort is expensive. So we adjust until we hit the edge of what we think is plausible, and then we just stop, because plausible feels correct. The anchor gives us a cheap place to start, and then our brains are just wired to prefer cheap and easy. And then there's a finding that should worry anybody who makes decisions for a living. Experts anchor too. Bert English, Thomas Mosweiler, and Fritz Strack, they ran a study with real criminal judges. Now, these were seasoned professionals. They had an average of more than a decade on the bench. Now, each judge worked through the same hypothetical case. There was a trial, it had the victim's account, it had prosecution and defense arguments, so everything you'd see in a normal trial. Now, it wasn't a real defendant, but it was built to feel like the real thing. The evidence was deliberately mixed so that the judges felt genuinely unsure about the right sentence. And then before deciding, the researchers had each judge roll a pair of dice that were secretly loaded to land either high or low. Now, same as with Tversky and Kahneman's experiment, a number that obviously had absolutely nothing to do with the case, just a random dice roll before they decided on the sentence. The judges who rolled high recommended longer prison sentences than the judges who rolled low. Now remember, these were experienced professionals, the same case, the same facts. The only thing that changed was the number that they rolled on a pair of dice before they made their decision. Now this wasn't the only experiment either. Other experiments showed the same thing with real estate agents. Agents were given identical house listings, but they had different arbitrary prices. And then the researchers asked those agents to give appraisals on those properties. And what happened was the agents' valuations tracked to that arbitrary listing price, but the agents insisted that the price had not influenced them at all. Now, the denial is the key to why anchoring is so dangerous. It runs underneath our awareness and in our subconscious. Now, obviously, we don't feel ourselves being anchored. We feel like we're reasoning from scratch, like we're weighing the evidence, and then we're landing on a fair number. But meanwhile, that starting point is steering the whole thing all along. Now, that's not always a bad thing. Sometimes that's actually genuinely useful, but it's dangerous when the starting point is complete garbage. Now, the version of anchoring that hurts teams the most is not a rogue number on a dice throw. It's the fact that whoever frames a problem first sets the boundaries everybody else reasons inside of. Now take the first draft of any document. The person who writes that initial PRD or that opening strategy doc or the first version of a roadmap, they've done more than start the work. They've set the anchor. Every review after that becomes a set of adjustments on their original draft. Comments cluster around what's already written. Nobody rewrites the entire thing or questions the entire doc from the beginning. The first draft wins not because it was best, but because it got there first. Now, redesigns show this vividly. When a team sets out to quote-unquote rethink a feature, the old design becomes the anchor almost immediately. The new version drifts a little bit from the old one, but then it stops because the old layout defines what that feature even looked like in everybody else's head. And then you end up with a reskin when you meant to reinvent. The existing thing anchored our imagination for that new thing. Now, status quo works this way in general too. Whatever exists now functions as an anchor that nobody deliberately chooses. How do we improve this process starts from the current process and adjusts outward, which quietly rules out the possibility that the whole process was wrong to begin with. Even research synthesis isn't safe. The first interpretation someone voices in a readout, especially a confident one, becomes the frame that the rest of the team reasons around. Alternative readings of the same data get measured against that opening take instead of generated fresh, so the analysis narrows before the evidence has really been explored. Everything so far is about not getting anchored, but the same mechanism runs the other way too, and sometimes we want to be the one using it on purpose. If the first number always sets the range, then be the one who says it first. The engineer who puts realistically this is 6 weeks on the table before leadership floats can we do it in 3 has anchored the conversation toward the actual work instead of reacting to a deadline that was just pulled from thin air. And the same with scope, staffing, the size of the task, doesn't matter. Whoever names the honest figure first shapes what everybody else treats as reasonable. Now that same lever works outside of the team too. It works in salary negotiations. The first number on the table tends to pull the final one towards it, which is a large part why recruiters push you to name your expectations before they name theirs. Now this is all about leverage that already exists in every estimation meeting, and the only question is who uses it. Leadership anchors aggressive timelines constantly, and they know exactly what they're doing when they do it. Now, naming a grounded number first is how a team keeps realistic baselines from getting defined by somebody whose incentives point somewhere else other than the people doing the actual work. Because remember, your corporate overlords are usually not looking out for you. Now, the through line from the judge and the real estate studies is that awareness and expertise barely help. You can know all of this and still anchor on the first draft, the old design, or the current state. So the solution isn't to just try harder to be objective. That's never going to work. It's to change the order and the source of the information on purpose. Have people reason before they see the existing artifact, or invite framings that start from a blank page instead of the current design. And treat the first version of anything like a doc, a design, or a take, or an opinion as one input rather than the center that everything else revolves around. So here are a few specific things that you can try. First, notice that the first draft sets the frame. Whoever writes that opening PRD or strategy doc or roadmap, whatever, isn't just starting the work. They're defining the box that everybody else thinks inside of. Reviews turn into adjustments on the original framing instead of fresh looks at the problem. Before you react to a draft, ask what question it assumed and whether that's the right question to begin with. The goal is to critique the whole box, not just polish what's already inside of it. Next, watch the old design anchor the new one. When you set out to redesign something, that existing version becomes an anchor almost instantly. Your new direction drifts a little bit from the old layout, but then it stops, because the old design defined what the feature looked like in your head from the start. If you want a real redesign, start from the problem and the user need before you go and reopen the current design, because looking at what exists too early can cap how far your imagination's willing to go. Next, treat the status quo as an anchor that nobody chose. How do we improve this almost always starts from what exists now and adjusts outward, which rules out the chance that the current approach was wrong from the start. The present state is the loudest anchor in any room because it's sitting in the back of everybody's head. And every so often ask that bigger question. If we're starting fresh, would we build it this way? And that helps to break the gravitational pull of what happens to exist today. Next, set the anchor instead of adjusting the one. Anchoring runs in every negotiation, every salary, every scope, every timeline, whether you name it or not. And the side that puts that first reasonable number on the table usually ends up closer to their target because everybody else adjusts from that. The research on first offers backs this up. So when you know a number's coming, don't wait to react to theirs. Come in first with a figure that you can defend. And when somebody anchors you, notice that pull before you respond and counter with your own reasoning rather than negotiating off of their starting point. And then lastly, change the order, not just your intentions. Experienced judges anchored on dice that they knew were completely random. Real estate agents anchored on prices that they swore didn't matter. Willpower and expertise don't switch this bias off. What actually helps is controlling the sequence of information, gathering independent input before the group sees any artifact, generating framings from a blank page, treating the first version of anything as one option instead of the default. Design the process so the first thing seen isn't automatically the thing that wins. Now here's the thing to remember about anchoring, and it's the same thing to remember about every bias that we discuss here on the show. They never feel like a bias while it's happening. And in this case, it can feel like perfectly rational reasoning. You look at the number, the draft, the old design, and you genuinely believe that you're thinking it through from scratch, but you're not starting from scratch. You're starting from whatever showed up first, and your brain is doing what it does and adjusting from there. And that's why the fix is almost never just try to be more objective. The fix is more structural. Change what people see first in the order that they see it, and be aware of who gets to set the number. So the next time your team sets out to completely reimagine something, and you catch yourself opening that old file just to reference it, take a second and ask whether you're building something new or just putting lipstick on a pig. And when a number lands in the room, before anybody else has had a chance to think about it, ask the question that anchoring bias often causes us to skip. Where did that number come from, and why are we all landing so close to it? Well, all right, y'all, that's it for the Cognition Catalog for today. I hope it helped to shed a little bit of light on anchoring effect and how you can avoid some of those pitfalls at work. But I'm curious, you run into any of those issues related to the anchoring effect before? Have you used it to your advantage? I'd love to know. Let me know what you think on LinkedIn or shoot me an email at hello@beyonduxdesign.com. I'd love to hear from you. To learn more about the anchoring effect, you can find more resources at cognitioncatalog.com. Click a little bell on there so you get notified when a new episode drops so you never have to worry about falling for any of these cognitive biases again. And if you want to pick up some big, beautiful art prints of some select biases, make sure to check out beyonduxdesign.com/shop. Get free shipping on all orders over $30 and use the promo code YouTube to get 10% off your entire order. And if you have a favorite bias that you want to see in print, let me know. I'd be happy to take requests. And if your team is tired of reinventing the wheel every time a new project kicks off, Mobbin gives you access to over 600,000 beautifully designed UI screens and user flows, all searchable with AI, and it's the kind of tool that makes the whole team faster. So visit mobbin.com/beyondux to get 20% off Mobbin Pro and see why design teams are making it a company-wide staple in 2026. Help keep the show independent and ad-free. Check out beyonduxdesign.com/support to find out how. You can join Chris, Siraquan, Stacy, Radu, Megan, Andrew, John, Mark, Kevin, Jason, Michelle, Marty, Tino, Adina, Zoe, and many others, and help keep the show independent and ad-free. You get exclusive access to the entire video library of episodes, including episodes before they're even released. Get instant access to those video archives right now for as little as $5 a month. And until next time, remember, you're more than a designer because there's more to UX and design. I'll see you around. Take care, y'all.